you can't see that there's a ditch that I'm jumping. So I just dropped my front wheel in the ditch and went over the bars pretty hard. I mean, I've slammed thousands of times like most people, and sometimes you get up with a few scratches and other times it bites you. So yeah, even before I went to the hospital, I was like, maybe I'll be okay. Like, just get me some ice and I should be all right. But I was told by the medics, like, you got to go to the hospital. We got to call an ambulance. Like, you can't even sit down, let alone put weight on it. And I was like, no, just stand me up on my feet. I think I'm okay. And as soon as they stood me up, I almost passed out. So,
Neko Mulally, welcome back to the Downtime podcast. It's been a while. A lot's happened. But this does mean we're edging closer to the downhill season, which is exciting stuff. How are you? Suboptimal, I guess, but on a good progression?
Yeah, good, man. Good to see you. I'm 6 weeks into a 12-week recovery from a broken pelvis. So I'm good. I mean, I'm better than I was. And all things considered, things are going well.
Good stuff. Let's find out a little bit about what happened then.
It was at Windrock for the first U.S. National of the year. Yeah, I was I was doing my first practice run of the day. It's funny enough, I haven't ridden a ton at Windrock this winter because we have a bike park at Rock Creek now. Definitely been out there a handful of days to ride, but with travel and stuff, I honestly, I didn't ride there that much this winter, and they built some new stuff just for the racetrack for that event. And there was like an inside berm to berm gap that was built off of a rock. It was not perfect intentionally, I think. It was kind of a gnarly little feature that was the fast line. And yeah, I hit it first run, and I looked at it when I walked the track the day before, and I knew it was kind of sketch, but I wanted to check it off first run. And yeah, I just hit it too far to the left. And because I was jumping to the back of a berm, it was longer when I went further left, and I got bucked on the takeoff and just dropped my front wheel basically behind the berm. I posted a video on my Instagram, but it's hard to see because Asa was behind me and you can't see that there's a ditch that I'm jumping. So I just dropped my front wheel in the ditch and went over the bars pretty hard. I mean, I've slammed thousands of times like most people, and sometimes you get up with a few scratches and other times it bites you. So yeah, it was total bummer. But I'm honestly grateful that it's not something worse. It wasn't a spine injury or a brain injury. Like, it's a pretty annoying broken bone, probably one of the worst ones you could break, but it's still a broken bone, and you kind of serve your time, heal back up, and I'll be okay. So just got to get through the recovery.
So no surgery or anything, just some time on crutches and some rehab to get back on the bike in another few more weeks?
No, I did have surgery. I went to the hospital immediately. Like, after I crashed, honestly, I wasn't in a ton of pain considering how big of an injury it was. Like, I couldn't really lift my leg. I didn't feel like it was like paralyzed or anything, but as I was sitting there, like, I didn't have the strength to move my leg. So I knew something was wrong. And I was like, guys, I wasn't screaming. I was like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to walk out of here. Can you get some help? They carried me out. And yeah, I couldn't really like even move that leg. And even before I went to the hospital, I was like, maybe I'll be okay. Like, just get me some ice and I should be all right. But I was told by the medics, like, you got to go to the hospital. We got to call an ambulance. Like, you can't even sit down, let alone put weight on it. And I was like, no, just stand me up on my feet. I think I'm okay. And as soon as they stood me up, I almost passed out. So it was obviously something more serious. And when I got to the hospital, they told me that the pelvis, where your femur goes into your pelvis, the socket was broken. And that kind of all added up as to why I couldn't put weight on it and why I was having some numbness in that leg. Honestly, it was kind of a relief to hear that, because I was worried that it might be like a nerve coming from my spine into my leg. It wasn't totally numb, as I said, but it was dull. So I was worried it might be something with that. But luckily, it like all added up the symptoms I was having, and I was like, cool, broken bone, just get it fixed and wait. So yeah, that was on a Friday, and then I asked to wait till Monday till the specialist came that does hips, and he came on Monday. The socket was broken in a few pieces, so we had to reconstruct it. And because it's where my leg goes into my pelvis, I have to stay on the crutches for 12 weeks so that it heals smoothly. If I stood on it, my leg would be pushing into the bone. So, got to stay off it for the full time. But, aside from that, things are going well, and I'm doing what I can, not so much like training, but just to do some exercise for mental health and, keep the blood flowing so that I can heal faster.
Yeah, man. Pretty serious injury, that one. Like, how are you looking for getting back on the bike? Does it mean you're likely to miss some of the start of the season from a World Cup perspective? We're not long out now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely miss the first block. Luckily, this year's kind of split into chunks, so I can, as long as I get cleared and my x-ray looks good, June 15th, that'll be the 12 weeks, and I'll be able to put weight on it and really do anything that, like, as I'm able to. It's kind of on me at that point. I guess they said like at 12 weeks, the bone's as strong as it will ever be from being rehealed. So that was what I was told to wait for. And then, yeah, that'll be June 15th, and I can start rebuilding the strength. Like I said, I can't put any weight on it now, but I've been like doing, I guess, open chain, they call them, movements. So like getting my leg moving, trying to reactivate, kind of wake up those muscles. It's crazy. After 2 weeks, my leg was half the size of the other leg. Like it atrophied so fast. So hopefully it comes back as quick as it went away. I'm sure it won't. But my goal is to just be ready to go and have some base fitness from being able to swim and do upper body stuff when I come into being able to put weight on it, and just see how quick the recovery goes. I'm going to do what I can. I feel like I have nothing to prove or no pressure to get back quickly. I want to do things in the right order, but I'm excited to race, and I really want to. So it's nice to have some motivation to try to get back. And luckily, there's a bunch of races late in the season this year. So at least the U.S. World Cups, Snowshoe and Mount St. Anne, are end of September, early October, which under my circumstances is good for me. So I think for sure that, and hopefully the ones sooner. I'll just have to, I've never dealt with this before, so I'll just have to see how quickly I can get back.
Yeah, fair play. Will we see a Frameworks Racing presence at the first few rounds? Are you going to be sending any riders or?
No, it would have to be the right person. And with the current World Cup structure, it's hard to find somebody who's able to do it and doesn't already have their own sponsors. So I'm doing what I can from the US here. I'm going to try to continue some of the development videos that I've been putting out. I'm working on having another recently retired rider come in and test ride my 2 new frames for me, continue some of those Frameworks videos to give value to my sponsors. I went over to Sea Otter and had a couple bikes on display. So doing what I can from that side. But yeah, if I can't race, it's so expensive to go to those events and hard to find someone who can really fill the slot. So I'm just going to do what I can to give value to my sponsors without racing, and then focus on being able to get back to it properly when I can.
Yeah, fair. And let's talk a bit about the bike. I mean, a lot of last season you spent on development work, and that's still ongoing. So I think you got to a point where you were pretty happy with like the geometry, the kinematic of the bike. You had some durability issues that you were kind of working on throughout the year with some cracks like propagating in the frame over time. How has that progress been going? And have you been trying to get some kind of durability testing in over the winter? I know you were talking about sending your brother to Windrock to just do lap on lap on lap for days on end. Yeah,
it's been going well. I mean, I'd say one thing is I thought I would get to the end of the road, and I don't think I'll ever get to the end of the road. The development process just keeps on going, and there's always more that you want to do. But the bike's in an awesome spot now. I did have those cracks through last year, and it went from a point of, in the beginning, being able to make big changes, deciding pivot locations, changing some of the suspension kinematics, and that was exciting. And then when it got into the construction and how to try to make the frames durable and efficient to build, and also easy to build so that they're easy to replicate. When you weld a bunch of small pieces together, there's more chance for things to go wrong. So I kind of got into the real engineering and not the hobby engineering after that, and was kind of thrown in the deep end. Luckily, had so many awesome people in the industry that were willing to help me out. Friends of mine, people that work for other big companies that were willing to talk to me and be a pretty open book. I could talk to one of the engineers from Specialized that works on the demo, and he was so open and helpful. I didn't expect him to be able to give me so much insight as he did. So just having so many people in the industry support it, I was able to do more than I would be able to do under my own knowledge. So that was awesome. But yeah, I got some revised aluminum frames kind of right at the end of last season, right after the last World Cup. We had the US Open up in Vermont, and I picked up some new frames from Frank's shop. Was only an hour from there. So that was basically everything we learned from racing the World Cup season, and our feedback on the durability. We changed a few things with the tubes that we chose, and some of the gusset designs, like even the way that those gussets were welded was so important. Small details that you're not going to feel when you're riding it, but really make a difference in dispersing the stress around the frame. So we got those in September, and I told my brother, like, I need your help. We need to ride this thing as much as possible, like real life testing. On the ones that we were riding before, we were getting 200 to 300 runs on before we saw a crack. So it was like a fatigue thing over time. And yeah, Logan put 10 laps a day at Windrock, and he was like going every day religiously, getting those runs in. And by Christmas, we had done, between the two of us, over 500 runs. So that was pretty cool to like see it get through all that testing, and like with the same bearings, like power washing it every day, not treating it like a pro race bike, like treating it like a person would. And at Windrock, which is one of the most demanding places on, anybody who's been there will say, like, that's where your stuff goes to break. So it was cool that it lasted that many runs. And I think it showed, because I made some for some of the other junior racers, some local kids. I made 12 frames and passed them out. Wanted to get some, not necessarily ride feedback, but just like, hey, treat this like your own, put whatever parts you have on it. Let me know if everything fits, how it's lasting over time, and try to do as many runs as you can. Like, that's what we want to see, is how well they last. And some of the other kids at the same point when we reached 500 runs were reporting back like, hey, I just did like 70 runs on this thing. And they thought they were riding a lot. Like, these are kids that practice and race. So for us to get the 500 kind of showed that people don't ride as much as they might think, and that getting those runs in was a good benchmark. So still today, like, any of those 12 frames haven't shown any cracks or issues. So trial and error that we went through last season seemed to work out pretty well.
Yeah, but you don't like to stand still on these things. So you've been starting to look at alternative materials and try a few other bits and pieces. One of the first things that you did was to move to a carbon rear end. Just tell us a little bit about that piece of work, because it's very, very different working and designing in carbon to working in any kind of metal. So I'm guessing you brought in some expertise there. But yeah, keen to hear about like the design process, why you went that direction, and then how you found the kind of the performance of the parts once they arrived.
Yeah, I guess the idea came from some issues we were having on the very first iterations of the frames. I'll say that the latest ones that Frank made, those 12 with the aluminum rear end, were pretty darn straight. Like, we've kind of figured out some of the issues that we did have. And a lot of it's to do with somewhat homemade, handmade nature of the things. They're not all exactly perfect, but headaches that I saw through the season were the alignment of the rear triangle. That's where, on my design, all the crucial pivots are on the bike. So front triangles are somewhat easy to make in relation to the rear end. There's a ton of bearings and pivots and clevises that need to fit over with spacers in between, and getting all that stuff to line up perfectly after it's been welded together and then heat treated. Some of them weren't perfect, and they were kind of all a little bit different in the beginning. So the brake mount as well was like something that needed to be absolutely perfect, needed to be like the right plane, the parallel to the rotor, the right spacing. And some of our bikes that were not 100% perfect, you would get brake fade because the caliper wouldn't be pushing the rotor absolutely perfect, and the rotor would reset the pads, and then your brake would pull in further than you thought it would. And it was something that I was dealing with through last season. So I was thinking of ways to make the rear triangle more precise and the same every time. And also, like, carbon had the advantage of reducing unsuspended mass. So there was a way to make it the quality better and reduce weight for performance. So it was something that made sense on paper, but was just like a bigger expense, a bigger upfront expense than any of the other things I had been playing with in the beginning. But it all, like, it had its advantages if I could afford it. So I talked to a friend of mine, Troyden, who is involved with the Crestline project. I'm pretty sure he's part owner in it. And they made their own Crestline downhill bike this year. And he actually reached out to me about, like, just picking my brain. And just as, like, those other engineers I mentioned were open to me, I tried to be as open as I could with him, asking questions about more so geometry and kinematics and why I chose stuff, and explained to him my thought process. So in return, I picked his brain about, like, hey, how are you making these frames in small quantities out of carbon fiber? And he told me about the factory that he was using and made me an introduction, which was awesome, because a lot of these people that were helping me, because I was a pro rider and I had some credibility, the carbon fiber factory in Asia has no idea who I am. So if I want to go to them with the proposal to do a small quantity of downhill parts, and not even full frames, but only chain stays and seat stays, they probably wouldn't agree to take on the project without a recommendation from someone reputable. So he was able to make me that contact and get in there. And the process started where their factory could take my 3D of my aluminum rear triangle and replicate that in carbon. And from my side, I was like, hey, this one works. So, and it all fits clearance wise. So can you guys just make the same thing out of carbon fiber? Ideally, it's lighter. Ideally, I mean, if the mold's perfect, everything's perfect every time. And they came back with a 3D model of how it would look in carbon fiber. And from there, I just asked a couple, because I mean, I don't really know what I'm looking at. Like, this looks like it will work from as much information as I have. But I asked a couple friends of mine, I sent the model and asked them for feedback. And Dan Roberts, who I had been friends with for a long time, he was an engineer for Scott when I raced for their team. And he's working on the raw bikes now. I think their project launched right about the same time as mine did. And he reached out, and I think right before they launched theirs, and said, hey, I watched your video. Like, we're working on a bike that's very similar to yours. And it was cool because when I read through it, I was like, man, great minds think alike, I guess. Like we both ended up with pretty close to the same thing, not knowing that we were each working on it. And kind of talked through some of the subtle differences between each of our bikes. And then I saw him at the first race and we talked more. And I didn't know who else to send it to. And I knew that Dan had done a few carbon bikes for Scott. He did the Scale, which at the time was like the lightest cross-country hardtail. And I'm sure that was a big learning process in working with carbon fiber and communicating with factories on working with carbon fiber too, which the communication is like more than half of it, I would say, to get what you want in the end. So when Dan looked at the model, his feedback was like, hey, yeah, this will fit. But the only reason that you made the rear triangle the shape that it was the first time was because of the tubes that you had access to and the tubes that Frank was using. So if you're going to invest into this mold and all the tooling to make a chainstay and seat stay, now you have the freedom with carbon fiber that you don't have with aluminum to make the shape whatever you want, not just how aluminum construction constrains you. So I said, yeah, I totally agree, but like I don't know what the next step is. So I kind of put the ball in his court and was like, well, can you help me then? Because I don't know I can't draft a 3D carbon fiber rear triangle. And yeah, he was super stoked to get involved, and so nice of him as well to do it. He spent, I don't know if it was more time than he anticipated, but way more than I anticipated just on the communication with the factory. He didn't actually draft the 3D, but he communicated with the person in their factory who did draft it and said, hey, this is great, but after further revision, we want to go back and kind of change everything. And obviously we'll pay for that revision, but gave them really clear instructions on what we were looking for to change the shape so that with carbon, you want to have like as much fiber flow, I guess he says. Like you don't want to have sharp edges. You don't want to go from thick to thin, which I don't think you want to do in other materials either, but you want the thing to naturally be strong by its shape. And Dan gave a lot of really good feedback for that. And also checking to make sure that in the future, if we wanted to use this piece on an enduro bike, we could do that, which kind of justified the cost a little bit for me. My bike was already using a 148 by 12 hub spacing, and I really just did that because I didn't want to have so many different hub sizes around. And the flange width on the 148 was super similar, so I didn't feel like I was losing anything. And talking with Specialized guys, they said that that's actually why they did it on the demo too. So I could use this rear triangle on an enduro bike, which justified the cost a little bit. And Dan being able to really double check that was actually going to fit was super helpful. I think he probably emailed them back and forth 200 times, which was way more. Like in my mind, I was just going to say, hello, I want this piece. They come back and tell me how much it costs. I send the money and they send the piece. But anybody who works in manufacturing would know that is never how it's actually going to happen. So Dan communicated a ton with being able to get that carbon fiber rear triangle made. And they sent a 3D printed one first that I could mount on the bike and double check the spacing of everything. And then that was all good. And then they sent like a first sample to ride, and that worked awesome. And then came back with another layup to try to see if I noticed any difference using a different fiber and different stiffness. So yeah, it was awesome to work with these guys, and the part works great and it solves all the issues that I explained. The ride quality, reducing the weight, the unsprung mass wasn't as noticeable as I had hoped. I spent $25,000 in all the tooling to make this thing. So I was like, all right, this is going to ride amazing. And it was maybe a little better, definitely not worse, at least equal or better. But it was really the alignment and everything that fit together absolutely perfectly that was the win. So yeah, that's the story of the carbon rear triangle.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a huge amount of work, but it looks super nice. And like you say, it's all heading in the right direction, right? It's more repeatable. It's lighter where you want it to be lighter, but you still maintain the structural side. So you've got this carbon rear end and a front end that's become durable with all the modifications that you made, but you decided to go and have a little try with a steel front end. Tell us a bit about that project, because that's another huge piece of work.
Yeah, it was just an interesting idea. Like a whole reason why I started this project was to be able to kind of try everything and with an open mind, maybe things that on a race team they wouldn't allow you to try. So yeah, I just wanted to see if there was anything there. And I met Sai. Actually, you introduced me to him, Sai from Cotic, and he was just a super nice dude. As I mentioned, these other people being an open book, and he gave us a bunch of good info on how to do the gussets, which we applied to these frames that helped a ton, and probably a big reason why they are so durable in our latest aluminum versions. So after starting the communication with Sai, I asked him like, hey, if I want to try one in steel, can you give us some direction and how we would go about it? And after talking to him for a while, he offered to help with that and actually get the steel triangles made for us. So with his experience working with steel, it was like a no-brainer. Like instead of us trying to figure that out and choose the tubing, and Frank, who welds my frames, is more comfortable working with aluminum. He can weld steel, but he welds aluminum all day, every day. So that's his preference. And Sai's frame builder at Fiveland up in Edinburgh, they primarily work with steel and titanium. So Sai took the 3D of our aluminum frame, tried to copy it as closely as he could. Obviously, there's some different construction. With aluminum, you can CNC more parts because its material's softer and lighter. And with steel, you're at least in a prototype like this constrained to more of like a 2D process, working with tubes and plates, which on my front triangle is so simple that wasn't an issue. But Sai was able to dial in those details based on his knowledge working with his Rocket Enduro bike and what they've learned from that. And did the 3D model and then communicated with Fiveland to get them made. So awesome to be able to work with him on that. Unfortunately, they showed up right as I got injured, so I wasn't able to ride them myself. But the idea with it was to make only the only variable between the aluminum frame and the steel frame, the material. We wanted the stiffness to be the same. Like I could make the aluminum frame flex more or less already. And people say that steel has more flex. But just looking at the numbers, I wanted it to be the same stiffness and isolate only the material to see if dynamically on the trail, when you're riding it, it reacts differently. Just because something measures the same stiffness doesn't mean that it rebounds to the original point the same as something of the same stiffness. So yeah, I'm excited to test it myself. Guys that have ridden it have given me some feedback, which was pretty much what I expected. Obviously, I try to go with an open mind, but the bike ride's really similar, almost the same, but the way that you feel the vibrations from the ground into your hands and feet is delivered a little differently. So I'm super excited to try to feel that out for myself as soon as I can.
Yeah, hopefully it won't be too long. Are there plans then beyond the current state of the bike to go further, whether that's in modifications to like the frame side of things or even in the component side, because you're pretty free to move around as you want, all right?
Yeah, and actually I did start already working on a revised aluminum frame. We got the steel frames in April, and if all was on track for me to race, that wouldn't have been enough time to test, take feedback, and build the race bikes in time for the first World Cup. So I had already started on the notes on my geometry and kinematics that I gathered over the past season and off-season testing. Also, we 3D scanned our bikes and got a really accurate measurement of in reality what our kinematics and geometry was. It was awesome. A friend of mine one of the kids that I gave one of my frames to durability test this year, his dad is a aerodynamics R&D guy at a NASCAR shop. And I didn't know that when the kid does the local races. His name's Austin Hazley. And he was ripping on an enduro bike. And I was like, hey, would you be interested in getting a downhill bike and trying one of these? And he was stoked to get it. And then I've come to find that his dad was this aerodynamics guy at the NASCAR place and came back like offering to scan the bikes and help out as much as he could, which was just like an awesome coincidence. And helped out so much. Like if I was to take that to a place who could scan it, would cost thousands of dollars. And the dude did it for me after work and was glad to help, invited us back to scan like any new frames that we had and compare them. And through that process could see that the frames were actually more accurate than I expected. I thought being handmade by Frank, he doesn't have all the tools that a big factory does, that they would be a little further off, but everything was pretty spot on. I learned more that the components aren't always as precise you can't just assume that your tire is the size that they give you as their measurement, or that your shock eye to eye could be like a mil or two different than what the exact measurement is. And that stuff can throw off your geometry in a big way. We scanned it with a few different axle to crowns on a downhill bike. You can slide the forks through and see how that actually affects the bike, not just on a computer simulation. So learning that gave us a bunch of valuable info for tuning on the track and to better design the bikes, knowing what those real world measurements are. So taking that info plus the ride feedback that I had from the past year, I designed with Dan's help, actually, a revised version of my front triangle. The carbon rear end was locked in, and the points are pretty neutral. So with a different rocker link and with different main pivot and rocker pivot mount to the front end, I could change everything in the small window that I wanted to. So yeah, I'm really excited to get the next revision of the frames. I got a couple things stacked up for me now to test the aluminum and steel against each other, and then test the new version of the aluminum frames. They're a little different in their construction. Like I said, the ones that we rode all winter, the construction improved in just some small details of the gussets and everything. But the new ones, I changed how the tubes, instead of using bent tubes, we used all straight tubes and put the complexity into the CNC pieces. And being able to have a resource like 5Dev, who is a sponsor of mine, they make the cranks that I use and a bunch of other awesome components. They have a huge CNC capability. They're primarily a CNC manufacturer. And with their help, being able to design all the complexity into the CNC parts rather than the frame builder's hands, it allows the frame to be made the same every time. And if it's easier to make, it's easier to make perfect. So I'm excited to get these. It's like small details now. But I guess that's what you get into the further you get into the process.
Yeah, definitely. It gets more and more complex the further you go. But it's been cool to see that with you away from the bike for a little bit, you've got a young upcoming American star swinging his leg over the Frameworks bikes. Asa, I'm not sure how to pronounce his surname. Is it Vermetti?
Yeah, Asa Vermette. Yeah, he's been...
Vermette. Okay. Tell me a bit about this guy.
Well, I met him last year at the U.S. Open. I'd seen some of his results from the summer and never got to introduce myself, but he raced pro at the U.S. Open and got to hang out with him and his dad a little bit that weekend. And then he ended up getting third in the race in pro. He was 15 and was 1 second ahead of me in the race. So he crushed it. And we were just hanging out behind the podium. And I said, "What are you guys doing tomorrow? Would you like to test ride a Frameworks bike?" And they were like, "Yeah, I mean, we don't have any plans. We'll hang out." So they stayed the day after the race. We went and we rode the racetrack. And they're from Colorado, where it's a lot drier climate, doesn't rain a lot. And it poured down rain all night after the race. And I said to Asa, we got in the start, I was like, "Hey, dude, I'll follow you, but just scope it out first run. It's going to be a lot different than we raced it yesterday." And he's like, "Cool." Dropped in, no questions about how fast to go, to do a full run or not, just as fast as he could go, hitting the puddles, sliding around, no concern, consistent riding. And got to watch him right behind me, or I was right behind him. He was riding one of my bikes, and we rode all day. He did 6 full runs, never asked if he should stop or how fast to go. And he really liked the bike. So it was cool that he was into it. From there, I said, like, "Hey, I can send you this bike if you want to ride it." But like, obviously I'm a somewhat of a privateer myself. But if I would like to help you as much as I can. So I sent him that bike as soon as we got back from the US Open. He rode it all winter and was stoked on it. And then this year I gave him another frame, and when these new ones come, he'll get to ride those as well. And he really stepped up his game and has been absolutely crushing it at all the races this year. He went to New Zealand Crankworks. We planned the trip together, and he had a really good finish there. I think he got second in junior. There was some local kids that were really fast, but that was a good first overseas experience for him. And then coming back to some of the US races where he was able to race pro, he won the second Downhill Southeast against a pretty stacked field. So he's getting better every weekend. And from my side as well, it's awesome to have him as, I wouldn't say like right now a teammate, but just like a friend that's on my bike and that I'm able to kind of take under my wing. He's young and appreciates all the advice that I can help him out with. And then on the flip side, like having a young kid like that makes me ride better. When we were in New Zealand, I hit this gap on the racetrack on the inside of one of the turns, and watching back on the broadcast, I was the only one to hit it. I didn't realize that it was so gnarly when I did it, because Asa did it in his race run before me and said, "Yo, inside over the log, just send it and you can jump all the way to the turn." And I was like, all right, if he said it's good, then it's good. So I did the same thing and ended up actually being the only one to do it. So having a kid like that is awesome to have with you. And I'm really looking forward to riding with him more and seeing, how everything progresses.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it was a good result for you at Crankworks, man. How was that? Because it's a long trip for just a one event, but it looked like it was worth it.
Yeah, it was. I ended up being super worth it. I mean, my goal to go there was, not knowing how things were going to be at the World Cup for someone that's kind of in my spot where, if you make the top 60, it's tough. Like obviously the goal for me this going into the year was to make those finals, but top 30 is really tough. There's 30 guys on factory teams. So I wanted to do Crankworks as well. At least do the first couple to see how those were going to go. The Red Bull TV was was supposed to put a ton into the broadcast. So I figured like, hey, I'm going to start doing Crankworks. At least I'll be there. I have the opportunity to do the full series if it is valuable, and I'm going to go to the first one and just see what happens. And man, it was actually so valuable. Like, I got my run on Red Bull TV. I ended up doing awesome in the race, and watching back the show, I'd been in the hot seat for a long time. So like, for all my sponsors, I didn't say that I was going to Crankworks. That wasn't an obligation, but to go there, get that run, and get exposure was super valuable. And then from my side, just like so stoked to do a good run with a pretty stacked field, like within a second of Bruni and Ali Zwar, who are both awesome riders, and beat some other really fast World Cup dudes. So it was a good little confidence boost that, after the first season and kind of seeing through the project and getting more and more time on the bike, things were starting to fall into place. And getting a result like that always feels so good. Like, as a racer, from my side, like, you do it for yourself primarily. Like, of course, there's sponsors paying you, and as long as you're a good ambassador for their brand, there's normally not a ton of pressure, I would say, on like the exact result you get. But for me, like, I want to do the best I can, and I want to put down a race run that I can look back and be proud of. And I exceeded my expectations that day. And when you can do that, that's like the best feeling as a racer. So getting on the podium, standing next to those guys, and sitting on the hot seat waiting for the last dude to come down was like such a cool feeling, and brought back, I guess, that like fire from years past. And it was funny, like, so it was the week later, I was in the hospital, couldn't even move my leg. And my brother Logan there with me. And I was like, as bad as this is, like, all I can think of is how cool it was to do well in that race last weekend, and how much I want to do that again. And like, as shitty as this next 3 months is going to be, like, honestly, it's worth it for getting that result last weekend and the feeling of accomplishment that comes with it. So, funny, like, turn of like emotional roller coaster, you would say, but it was so cool to get that result, and inspired me a lot. So I want to do it again.
Yeah, it's cool that result came at that time then, to give you those good vibes while you're in hospital dealing with what you've been dealing with. And it's been nice to see recognition as well in the latest Red Bull TV project called Race Tapes, which went live very recently. There's an episode called DIY within that, and the Frameworks project features in that, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, it was awesome that they included me. I was stoked that I could be a part of it. So yeah, if you have a chance to check it out, it's regardless of whether I'm in it or not, it's an awesome video series. If you're into downhill racing, you should go watch it.
Yeah, definitely. So any closer to plans to sell these bikes then? I know there's probably quite a few people starting to line up on the internet ready to press the buy button when it appears, but are you any closer from your perspective?
Yeah, closer, always closer. And it's awesome I get asked all the time in person as well. And people are sending a message on my video or on my social media. And it's cool that so many people are into it like that. And I would say, like, yeah, it is a goal for the future. Mainly because it would be awesome to get the income of a frame sponsor, you would say. Like, I'm doing a whole race team without what most race teams have as their title sponsor. Santa Cruz Syndicate without Santa Cruz would probably have a lot smaller budget. So if it was up to me, I would keep doing experiments and never sell anything. But to be able to sustain doing this and do more cool things, a really cool trade-off would be to sell some bikes to people who would be really stoked to get them, or happy to exchange their money for the value of a frame, and see them out there in the public with people riding them. And then have that resource to take the project further. So I was just really scared, and I'm glad that I didn't go down that road just yet, with the quality control and durability of everything, and just, you know, wanting to make sure that if I give someone something, that it's going to be something that lasts and that's not going to come back and give them or me any headache. Like, you know, Logan and I are doing all of this ourselves, and I don't really have the bandwidth to warranty a bunch of frames that could give people trouble. And, you know, the last batch that we made, those 12 that I have out with all these junior kids racing them, not a single one has had an issue. So I'm pretty confident now that with everything we learned, we can make durable frames, both from like a construction standpoint and like all the bearings and everything seem to last better. Like if we'd have done 500 runs at Windrock on a lot of other production bikes, I don't think they would have made it. So I think we're in a good spot, and I just want to get this next version that I explained. I think they're another step ahead of the stuff that we have now, and as long as we can put a summer's worth of riding between me and Asa, and I'll get Logan back on the testing job again. Hopefully next year we can maybe sell some bikes. I don't want to promise anything, and it's something that I don't want to be pressured to do. I just want to do when the time's right, mainly because I want to offer a really good product and something that, you know, people have a great experience with. It's tough to, like, I want it to be perfect. It probably will never be absolutely perfect, but I want to try to get it as close to that as I can with the resources I have.
Nice. Yeah, it's exciting to see it progress, man. It's come so far already in a year, and I'm sure this time next year it will be another big chunk forward. We should talk a little bit about 2023 World Cup. Unfortunately, you're not going to be at the first few rounds, but last year you were kind of track walk guy with the UCI, like looking at safety and helping represent the riders in that perspective. Is that still the case? Like, are you going to be involved on that level, like for this season?
Yeah, we've kind of created a board, which is, it started out as me and Emily Siegenthaler, that were communicating between the riders and the ESO, which our point of contact now is Rory Cunningham, and he's awesome to deal with. Former rider, totally understands our perspective. And we've expanded it to have Loic, Tani, and Aaron involved in the riders board as well. So it gives it a more balanced group that has other, like I was the only active racer, so some other active racers to give feedback as well. And Emily's primarily doing the load of work, where it's the communication, the creating some feedback documents, and I'm also helping where I can. I go on the meetings with her, with whether we can talk to Rory or Chris Paul, and I'll do that as much as I can. I'm happy to help. I'm not going out of my way to try to do, I don't know, look for problems that haven't arisen yet. But when the riders come with questions and we need to communicate that, I'm happy to do as much as I can. So not being able to be at the first few races, I think Emily will probably be able to offer a lot more support than I am. But I didn't really elect to do this. We had a meeting. We had a few meetings this year, and in one of the last ones, Loic publicly asked if I would be the rep for the group, and I couldn't really say no in front of everyone, and I wanted to help too. I was happy to help. So, like I said, I'm not chasing those guys down to do more, but trying to help as much as I can to make, and I feel like I have a pretty balanced viewpoint, being like me and my family put on the Downhill Southeast race series. So I've organized a ton of downhill races and even some UCI ones when I was doing the Tennessee National at Windrock. So I can see from both sides like what goes into creating an event. Obviously nothing on the level of a World Cup, but sometimes as a rider, your perspective isn't the same as when you know how much goes into organizing the race and what resources are available. So I try to, I think, come in with a different perspective, and when I can talk to those guys on the event side, can try to find a good middle ground and at least achieve the main goal of what the riders are looking for in a way that both sides are able to execute.
Yeah. So you obviously weren't at the Lord's Test event, but I'm guessing you've heard some feedback from that based on your role on the board of kind of the riders group. What was the general feedback from Lord's? Like, everything I've heard so far seems pretty positive.
Yeah, I think everything was really positive. It might be tough with the amount of riders that were at Lord's versus what would be at a World Cup to really get a good understanding of how it'll work. But I'd say the event went well. The course markings look good. I thought that when Rory presented them to us a few months ago, they looked awesome. Like, it was a big step in the right direction. Visually, they look better. Hopefully, they keep the track more consistent. I'm not sure if getting rid of course tape for the idea of it being not environmentally sustainable is really viable. We fly across the planet, use a tire for 3 runs and throw it away, and we can't have course tape because it's bad for the environment. Like, at some point, none of this is. And yeah, it's good to do what we can. But I think they have a good plan to reduce that where they can. And I do think that the new markings look better as long as they can keep the public off the track. So I can appreciate both sides of it. And I think that I definitely like the new markings.
Yeah, and the finished gantry looked a lot better. Like, they had these 2 huge computer screens either side of the finish, like showing the rider and data and stuff like that. Like, it already looks, I guess, more of a professional sport, which is a good step forwards, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. So the next thing will be to see how the broadcast looks, because that's the main thing. There's way more people watching it, obviously, on TV than in person. And if they can give more data to the people watching from home and create a better viewing experience, like, that'll be huge. So unfortunately, I'll get to watch it from home the first couple rounds, and I'll get to see how that all pans out. But yeah, I mean, from my side, there's a lot of concerns, but like with anything new and with any change, you have that. And I really just want to see what happens. Like, I don't want to be too quick to criticize. Like, it's their idea. Let's see how it goes. And then afterwards, if we need to give constructive feedback, can go that route. But yeah, I'm optimistic, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah, so as a fan then, which is, I guess, the seat you're unfortunately going to be sitting in for the first block of racing, like, what are you most excited about this year?
Oh, I mean, always at the first race, there's not a precedent from who's on form. So it's so exciting to see those first times come in and see where people are stacking up. And we'll have, a couple of weeks back to back of guys coming in, raising the bar. Every year, riders get faster, equipment gets better, and it'll be exciting to see, how that all goes. And in addition, like Jordan and Jackson coming into elite and seeing where they slot in. There's just, downhill racing is so cool because the race is short enough and there's so many variables to it that you can't predict that the fastest person on paper will be the fastest. So it's that's why you watch downhill to the final run. And I can't wait to see how it all stacks up.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting start to the season. And it's been a busy off season with you, not just with the bike and training and racing and everything else that you've done, but you've also casually just knocked out another bike park in your spare time with Ride Rock Creek. And I think I was over there in March last year, and you mentioned that you had like agreed on the land, I think, for it. How do we get from March, like, you know, having a line in the sand to now having a bike park that's open, running multiple tracks with the national champs on it this year, I think?
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I mean, I was super motivated to work on the project myself, primarily to have a downhill park close to my house. I think anybody would be stoked to be involved with that. But yeah, luckily our bike park at Ride Canuga has been going super well, and we wanted to expand to have a shuttle access bike park in our area as well. So my partner, Dave Lamond, bought the property. Really nice venue, has tons of parking, which is the hardest thing to find when you want to have a bike park. I've been involved with a few now, is having all the infrastructure that you need, whether it be parking lots, shuttle roads, the trailhead shop, check-in area to run a legitimate business, and then also a huge gnarly mountain to have downhill tracks on. And the property that we found, I thought, was an awesome balance of it. The location is really good. It's close to some major cities and kind of along a way that most people can access. It's not in the middle of nowhere. And the property has tons of parking. We built a really nice shuttle road that's super fast to get to the top. There's a really cool lake on the property that just makes the area look super nice. And the terrain is pretty good. I would like it to be gnarlier, but for a public bike park, I think it's perfect. It's not so gnarly that you're limited to the trails you make being only a certain way. And it's easier to try to make the trails that you need harder than to try to make really gnarly stuff easier. So, yeah, I was stoked to be involved with it. Like with all the projects that I've been able to work on the past few years, building the frames, working on the bike park. Sorry, I had to get a cat out of here. It's stuff that I am super passionate about. And I think most people that are listening to this is a mountain bike podcast, would agree that it's like awesome to be able to do cool projects that you're passionate about, whether it's trail building, working on bikes. Like, it's so cool. So I'm really grateful that we have the opportunity to do that. This year we have the national champs there. I've been involved with USA Cycling for a while, giving feedback and trying to help improve the sport. And they had a venue for their cross country in the past. Cross country and downhill were always together, and they found a venue for endurance, and they didn't have one for downhill. And I put my hand up and said, we've got this venue. We'd be happy to host it. We have the resources to do it. And we came out and inspected it and said, yeah, we want to work with you. So for the next 2 years, we got the downhill national champs. And I mean, from my side, like, I just want to try to make the event better. And with like the involvement that our bike park can have, I think that we can do that and just make the stoke for downhill racing even higher.
Yeah, good work, man. Well, we're doing a little bit of downhill racing ourselves this year, which I'm both excited and nervous about. First race is rapidly approaching, so I thought I'd pick your brains. Any advice for someone who hasn't raced downhill for a long time and has limited skill?
Practice a lot. I mean, there's no substitute for the seat time. I think if you can get out to the bike park and get as many runs as you can, and try to start, I mean, I'll try to take this advice too when I come back, is like, start not rushing. You want to feel the rhythm before you try to up the speed, and try to use good technique before going too fast. Obviously comes a point where the time is the time, but I think the more time you can have on your bike and just starting doing the technique first before the speed. That'll get your ceiling even higher.
All right, solid advice. We'll see how we get on. There's been a decent amount of seat time, and there can always be more. But yeah, I think the first race, all three of us have said like that would be the most condensed seat time we've had, to be fair. So just having 2 days with like really good uplifts. I think there's 2 race runs in the format of the series we're doing as well. So there's plenty of riding to be had. So hopefully we'll make some good progression over the weekend.
Yeah, I see it a lot with our regional races where in the amateur, the masters categories, like some people have a work structure that they can ride their bike a few times a week and can practice all the time. And some other guys have to work every day and have tons of responsibilities. And it's like pretty strong correlation between the people who have the opportunity to ride more and practice more and the guys that are doing well in the races. So I know it's tough, especially like, you know, you have to work, you have a family, you have lots of responsibilities, but the more you can ride your bike, the better you're going to do in the race.
True. So if there isn't a podcast episode for a few weeks, everyone knows where I am. All right, man. We should start to wrap up. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up, and sorry to see that it's going to be a few races missed this season, but also glad that it's not much worse because it sounded like a pretty nasty crash. But yeah, we'll definitely be catching up throughout the season. So all the best for the rest of your recovery, and we look forward to seeing you on a racetrack as soon as is safely possible, I guess.
Yeah, me too, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks for everybody listening. I know the Downtime listeners support my program a ton. So thank you guys, and talk to you soon, Chris.
Nice one. Cheers, Neko.